The sun was dying slow over the valley that evening, bleeding red across the sky like the land itself had been cut open. I'd been digging fence posts since morning, sweating salt into dirt that hadn't seen rain in months. The air tasted like rust. You could hear the wind dragging dust over old bones and empty fields. That's how quiet it was. That's how dead things stayed out here. I remember leaning on the shovel when I saw her. Just a speck at first, a lone rider, swaying hard in the saddle, fighting to stay upright against the wind. I figured it was another drifter looking for shade or a drink, but then the light hit something on her chest. A flash of silver, a badge, and not just any badge. My badge. My stomach turned cold. I buried that piece of iron 10 years ago, along with everything it stood for. Her horse was staggering by the time she reached my gate, foam streaking its neck, ribs showing through dust. I stepped forward, hand near my sidearm, but she raised a shaking hand and called out through the wind, "They're coming." That's all she said. Then the horse gave one last groan and went down, nearly crushing her leg. I caught her before she hit the dirt. Blood ran from her shoulder, dark, thick, and old. She'd been running for hours. Inside, I muttered. She didn't argue. We stumbled through the door as thunder cracked across the canyon. I dropped the bar over the frame, every instinct I'd buried roaring back to life. She fell near the hearth, breathing fast, one hand still gripping that badge. "My badge! Who the hell are you?" I asked. She looked up, eyes sharp even through the pain. "Name's Lena Hart. Marshal's office out of Red Bluff." "Red Bluff's 2 days east," I said. "I didn't make it clean," she whispered. "They're right behind me." And before I could ask who they were, the first gunshot rolled down the canyon, distant, but clear enough to know it wasn't thunder. That sound carried something I'd sworn never to hear again. Trouble. Real trouble. The wind clawed at the shutters like it wanted in. Every strike of rain against the glass sounded like a warning Eli Ward didn't need to hear. The woman sat near the hearth, her coat steaming in the fire's glow, lamplight cutting across her face. She looked half dead, but her eyes were alive, sharp, too steady for a stranger. A tin star hung crooked on her chest, the kind Eli once wore before he buried that life deep in a grave and walked away from the law. He watched her tend to the wound on her arm, calm as a surgeon, her jaw set tight. The fire hissed when the blood hit the coals. She didn't flinch. "Where'd you get that badge?" he asked, voice low like the question itself might bite. She didn't answer right away. Just twisted a strip of cloth, tied it firm, and stared into the flames. The silence between them was louder than the thunder outside. "It was mine once," Eli said. "Same scratches, same dent near the edge. I tossed it in a grave after the job that near killed me." Her eyes met his. "Guess the grave didn't hold." Eli's hand drifted near the rifle leaning by the wall. "That badge brought more death than justice." "Then we got something in common," she said quietly, touching the star on her chest. "Because I buried my name with mine, too." For a long while, neither moved. The fire snapped, the wind screamed, the cabin walls groaned like they remembered old pain. He'd built this place to be quiet, safe, forgotten. But the second she stepped inside, the air changed. He poured a cup of coffee, slid it across the table. She didn't drink it. Instead, she said, "They're coming, Eli." He froze. "Who?" "The men who killed my partner. The ones who wear your old colors." Outside, lightning split the dark, briefly painting her face in white light, fierce and haunted. He saw now she wasn't a runaway or a drifter. She was a law dog with ghosts at her back. Eli stood, jaw clenched. "You brought hell to my doorstep." She looked up, tired but defiant. "Maybe, but hell was already living here, wasn't it?" The wind howled again, shaking the cabin. Two people sat inches apart, both armed, both broken, both with the same ghosts whispering behind their eyes. And for the first time in years, Eli Ward felt something he thought he'd buried with his badge, fear of what sunrise might bring. "What would you have done? Let her in or throw her back into the storm?" The rain came down steady, a slow hiss against the roof that made the cabin feel smaller with every drop. Outside, the world was nothing but gray and distance, the kind of rain that buried tracks and secrets together. Inside, the air carried the scent of wet timber, coffee, and old regret. Eli sat at the table, his rough hands wrapped around a tin cup. He didn't drink, just held it for warmth. Across from him, Lena Hart, still wearing that tarnished badge, watched the flames curl up the hearth. Neither spoke at first. Silence was safer. Silence had no truth in it. Finally, Eli broke it. "You ride in wearing that thing on your chest like it means something," he said, nodding toward the badge. "You got no idea what it cost to earn it." Lena's eyes lifted, sharp under the brim of her hat. "You think I don't?" Eli's voice stayed low, gravel over firelight. "That star used to be mine." The crackle from the fire filled the space between words. The rain beat harder against the shutters. He didn't mean to talk about it. But the storm had a way of prying open things better left buried. 5 years back, Eli began, I led a posse into the dry, hollow canyons. We were after a gang, killers, stage robbers, the worst kind. Or so we thought. His eyes didn't meet hers. They stayed fixed on the flame. Turned out the men we cornered weren't them. Just ranch hands, hired to haul freight. I gave the order to fire. He stopped. The fire popped, loud in the quiet. When the smoke cleared, he said, I saw a boy no older than 20 laying in the mud, staring up like he was still waiting on the truth. He pushed the cup aside. That badge didn't shine the same after that. So I buried it. Lena leaned back in her chair, the shadows cutting across her face. Then I guess I found what you left behind. She pulled the badge from her coat, dulled silver, edges nicked, but still catching the light like an old lie. I took this off a dead man outside Perdition Creek, she said quietly. He had it pinned to his chest like a trophy. Said it belonged to a marshal who lost his nerve. Eli's jaw tensed. That man have a name? Cray Hensley. The sound of it hit like a hammer. Eli's fingers tightened against the table. Cray was my deputy, he said after a long breath. Back when the badge still meant something. Thought I could trust him, Lena nodded. You can't trust a man who smiles too easy. He's wearing the same smile now. Only thing changed is the color of his hat. She sipped her coffee, her eyes never leaving his. He's the reason I came. Been chasing him across 3 states. He runs with 10 men and no conscience. The wind shifted. The fire leaned sideways in the draft. Eli looked at her. Truly looked. The scar on her wrist. The way she held her cup like a weapon she hadn't decided to use yet. You're not Law, he said. Not anymore. She gave a faint smile. Neither are you. For a moment they just stared. 2 ghosts measuring the weight of each other's sins. Eli spoke first. You wear that badge to remember justice? No, she said softly. I wear it so I don't forget what justice costs. The rain outside turned to thunder. The cabin shuddered once, as if the land itself was warning them that something was coming, something with a name they both already knew. Eli stood, walked to the window, and stared out into the dark hills. He's riding this way, he said. Lena nodded. Then we best be ready. Dawn came thin and gray, crawling slow over the ridgeline like a tired animal. The world was still half asleep, the kind of quiet that feels earned after a long night of confessions. But that peace didn't last long. Eli was mending the corral fence when he felt it first, that subtle shift in air, the low tremor of hoofbeats carried through the ground. He didn't look up right away. Old instincts don't need eyes. They just whisper trouble's coming. Then the shapes appeared through the mist. 3 riders, cutting a black line across the pale ridge. They moved slow, deliberate, circling wide like wolves testing a fence. Sunlight caught the steel of their rifles. The middle one raised a hand, not to greet, but to mark. Lena stepped out from the cabin, revolver already drawn. Her eyes were steady, unblinking. Hensley's men, she said flatly. I'd bet my last breath. The riders didn't approach. They just rode the perimeter of Eli's land, studying the house, the barn, the open field beyond. One of them lifted his rifle and fired once into the air, a sound that split the morning like thunder. Another dismounted, walking toward the fence post. Eli watched, jaw tight, as the man hammered something into the wood. When they rode off, the wind caught a scrap of torn leather flapping against the post. The message burned through the silence like a sermon. The badge dies twice. Lena stared at it, her face unreadable. They know we're here, she said. Eli spat in the dirt. They always did. They just wanted us to feel it. The air around them seemed to shrink, heavy with the weight of memory. Lena holstered her revolver but didn't step back. "We can stand," she said. "We can make 'em bleed for every inch." Eli looked past her, to the horizon still trembling with hoofprints. "You stand long enough out here, you learn the wind always changes sides," he muttered. She met his eyes. "Then let's make sure it changes ours." For a moment, neither spoke. The breeze carried dust and dread in equal measure. Somewhere deep inside, Eli felt that old storm rise again, the one made of guilt and duty, of men who never stopped paying for their past. And he knew right then, running was over. What would you have done? Face them head-on, or left before the dust settled? Out here, one wrong choice can bury you deeper than any grave. The sun sank red behind the ridgeline, painting the cabin in a dying glow. The wind carried the smell of dust and iron, the kind that warned a man his peace was about to end. Eli Ward stepped out onto the porch, hands calloused, eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Cray Hensley was coming, the lawless wearing the law's face, the ghost Eli had never truly buried. Inside, Marshal Lena Hart laid out her map, a rough sketch drawn in ash and sweat. She marked the fence line, the ridge, the hollow where shadows might crawl unseen. Her hands were steady, her jaw tight. She'd fought storms before, but not like this. Not shoulder to shoulder with a man who used to wear the same star now pinned to her chest. Eli entered quietly, setting down a box of cartridges. "We'll need light," he said. Lena nodded. "And luck." They spoke little after that. Words wasted time. Lanterns were trimmed and hung low, casting gold halos against the timber walls. The rhythmic scrape of a whetstone filled the air, Eli sharpening a knife so worn it had seen both mercy and murder. Lena moved from window to window, nailing planks tight, each hammer strike ringing like a countdown. The cabin began to change. What had been a home became a fortress. Eli dragged barrels of water near the door, just in case fire found them. Lena checked the rifles twice, oiling the barrels, wrapping cloth around their stocks to muffle sound. The air grew thick with smoke and silence. When she caught his gaze, she didn't look away. "Why bury the badge, Eli?" she asked. He set the blade down, because it buried too many others first. For a long moment, only the hammer spoke between them. Outside, the prairie moaned beneath the coming wind. The sky bruised purple, heavy with promise and threat. Together they moved through the tasks like clockwork, sealing windows, stacking wood, loading shells. Two ghosts preparing for the same reckoning. At the corral, Eli's voice broke the quiet. "The horses," he said. Lena turned. "They'll hear them." He nodded. "And use them." They worked side by side under a gray dusk, digging shallow pits beside the shed. The air was bitter with dust and sorrow. When the earth finally covered the last mare's flank, Lena pressed her hand to the soil. "Forgive us," she whispered. Back inside, the fire burned low. The cabin smelled of oil and sweat and rain not yet fallen. Eli leaned his rifle against the wall, his shadow long and bent across the floorboards. Lena sat by the hearth, her hands still stained with dirt. He spoke first. "You ever been scared?" She stared into the flames. "Every time I stopped moving." The wind pushed against the walls then, soft at first, then harder, like a hand testing a door. Both of them turned toward the sound, eyes meeting through the half-dark. "If we live through this," Lena said quietly, "we start clean." Eli nodded once, voice low as thunder in the distance. "Clean," he said. "And free." They didn't say another word. The night held them like a loaded gun, waiting for dawn to pull the trigger. The storm came crawling out of the canyons that night, low, growling, full of hate. Lightning rolled across the sky like a whip of God, and the wind carried dust thick enough to taste. Inside the cabin, Eli Ward sat by the dying fire, lantern light trembling across his face. His hand rested on the old Winchester laid across his knees, the metal warm from his palm. Outside, the horses shifted and groaned. They could sense it, the kind of quiet that always comes before blood. Lena Hart stood by the window, watching the horizon. She didn't blink when the first flash came, just a white scar tearing through the dark, followed by the slow rumble that made the walls hum. "They're close," she said, voice steady. "5 riders, maybe 6. Eli's eyes didn't lift. Cray always liked to bring a crowd. Another flash lit the plains, and for a heartbeat the world turned silver. Through the rain haze, 5 shadows appeared, mounted men, moving slow, confident. The one in front wore a wide-brimmed hat and a badge that caught the lightning like a curse. Cray Hensley? Once a deputy under Eli's command, now the outlaw who carried a lawman's badge like a joke. The hoofbeats drew closer, dull thuds swallowed by the storm. Lena checked her revolver, flipping the cylinder open with practiced ease. Eli rose, shoulders tight as thunder cracked over the roof. "You ready for this?" she asked. He gave a small nod. "I've been ready since the day he stopped calling me Marshal." Then came the first shot. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Lanterns shook from their hooks as the front window burst into dust and fire. Lena hit the floor first, rolling behind the table as bullets screamed through the walls. Eli ducked behind the hearth, firing a single round that split the storm outside. A rider tumbled from his horse, vanishing into the mud. Gunfire lit the darkness in flashes, quick, violent glimpses of men crouched behind fence posts, rifles aimed steady. The air inside the cabin turned thick with smoke and powder. Sparks jumped from the logs in the hearth, dancing like fireflies in hell. 2 ghosts wearing lies on their chests. Cray's voice thundered over the storm. "Ain't no law left in that house. Just old bones and bad luck." Lena's reply came sharp and cold. "Then come dig the bones yourself." She fired through the doorway. A scream cut through the wind. Another shadow fell. Eli reloaded slow, every movement deliberate. His hands trembled, but not from fear. His body remembered this rhythm, the smell of spent shells, the heat of wood under his boots, the sound of death tapping on the walls. He looked toward Lena. "You hold the door," he said. "I'll draw him close. You step outside, you won't make it back." He smiled. A tired, crooked thing. "Then I best make the walk count." The next lightning flash showed him standing in the open, rain pouring down his hat brim. The badge he once wore glimmered faintly beneath his coat, as if mocking him. Cray's men saw him and opened fire, rounds chewing through the mud at his feet. "He didn't flinch, Cray," Eli roared, voice swallowed by thunder. "You wanted me. Here I am." A figure broke from the dark, Cray Hensley, striding through the downpour like he owned the night. His face was carved from shadow, his coat soaked and heavy. The badge pinned to his chest gleamed like a lie polished too long. "Well, look at you," Cray called. The lawman turned hermit. "Thought you'd buried your sins deep enough to sleep easy, huh?" Eli's rifle stayed low, eyes never leaving the man's face. "You were the worst of them, Cray. You wore justice like a costume." Cray grinned. "And you wore mercy like a chain." They stared across 10 paces of rain and mud, 2 ghosts wearing the same regret. Lightning flashed again. Both men drew. The shots came as one. Eli's shoulder snapped back, pain white-hot. Cray staggered, a dark bloom spreading beneath the badge. He looked down, mouth open, eyes wide with something that might have been surprise or peace. Then he fell. The bullet had torn through the badge itself, melting its edge as the fire from a shattered lantern crawled along the floorboards. Oil spilled. The flames caught fast. Within seconds, the cabin walls were glowing with the fever of fire and storm. "Eli!" Lena shouted, bursting from the doorway. He turned, blood running down his arm, smoke clawing up the walls. "Get out!" She grabbed him anyway, slinging his good arm over her shoulder. Together they stumbled into the night as the roof gave way behind them. The explosion rolled across the valley like thunder from a different world. The cabin went up in a single breath of fire, boards, glass, and ghosts all swallowed by the storm. Burning fragments rained around them, mixing with the first hard drops of rain. The drought was breaking. The sky had finally decided to weep. They fell into the mud, coughing, choking on smoke and relief. Behind them, the fire dimmed under the downpour, turning to steam. The land hissed, drinking it all in, the ash, the gold, the sin. Lena looked at him, eyes shining under the rain. "It's over," she whispered. Eli watched the flames die. "No," he said softly. "It's finally clean." The thunder rolled away into distance, leaving only rain, steady, merciful, pure. The storm that had promised death had brought something else instead. Peace, earned the hard way. What would you have done that night? Would you have stood in that doorway against the ghosts of your past, or let the storm wash them away? The rain didn't answer. It just kept falling. And somewhere in that endless gray, two battered souls stood side by side. Badges burned, sins spent. Hearts finally lighter. Out here, the narrator says. Voice low and steady. Justice don't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes with fire, rain, and the will to start again. The storm didn't come gentle. It came like a reckoning, a wall of black clouds crawling over the plains, washing the fire from the night before. What had once been Eli Mercer's cabin was now a broken skeleton, charred beams jutting like ribs from the soaked earth. The fire that had devoured everything he owned was hissing itself into silence, one raindrop at a time. Under the bent oak tree, Eli lay on the mud, his right arm bandaged tight with a torn strip of linen. His breath came rough and slow. The rain ran down his face, tracing paths through soot and blood. Beside him, Lena Hart knelt, her own face smeared with ash, hands trembling but steady. She was tying the last knot in the makeshift dressing. Hold still, she said, her voice hoarse. He grunted, half-smile cutting through the pain. If I hold any stiller, you'll think I'm dead. A low rumble rolled across the valley. Thunder, or maybe memory. The land smelled of wet ash and burnt iron. Every breath carried ghosts, his family, her losses, the men they'd both buried. The rain softened it all, as if trying to forgive what couldn't be forgotten. When she was done, Lena sat back on her heels, staring at the smoldering ruin ahead. The cabin had been more than shelter. It was his punishment, his sanctuary, his secret, and now it was gone, swallowed by the storm like it had never stood at all. After a long silence, she rose and walked toward the ruin. Her boots sank into the mud, each step pulling like gravity didn't want to let her go. Smoke still lifted from the wreck, thin gray ribbons twisting into the rain. She knelt beside what used to be the hearth. Something glinted there, faint but persistent. She reached through the ash. The metal was still warm. Two badges, one hers, one his, melted together into a single shape. The stars fused into something crooked, unrecognizable but whole. Lena turned it in her palm, the firelight long gone, the dawn just breaking. She looked back at Eli, the man who'd once buried his badge to escape its curse. The man who'd picked it up again only to burn it for something cleaner than law, redemption. She walked back and crouched beside him. Guess the badge finally chose right, she said softly. He looked down at the twisted metal, then up at her. Maybe it finally remembered what it meant. The rain eased. The sky cracked open into color, pale gold leaking over the black hills. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel the weight of what he'd done, only the ache of what he'd lost, and the strange, quiet peace that comes after fire. He pushed himself to sit, wincing, and nodded toward the east. There's nothing left here, he said. No ghosts worth feeding, Lena nodded. Then let's go find something, that is. They mounted what was left of the horses, the mud thick and cold beneath their boots. As they rode, the camera would catch it all. Two silhouettes moving east through the silver rain. Smoke curling behind them like the tail of a dying storm. Eli turned once more toward the wreck. His voice low but sure. Justice ain't in the badge. It's in the hands that still bother to help. And as the rain turned soft and the sun cracked the horizon, they disappeared into the wet horizon. Two riders who buried the law and found mercy in the ashes. Out here, peace don't come easy. It don't come clean. But sometimes, when the rain falls hard enough, even the worst of us get washed new. What would you have done? Left him in the fire, or helped him stand? If stories like this still mean something where you are, saddle up with us again. Hit that lantern and ride on to the next tale. There's always another storm on the horizon.